those who showed up first here are the diehards. You guys are the ones who we look to as leaders as well, because you take seriously the engagement that MPAC is leading the way in. And to start off that panel, we have an incredible, to start off that conversation, we have an incredible panel lined up here for you. And what I'm going to have them do is introduce themselves, because it's so much more interesting to hear how someone presents themselves relating to this topic than to have me speak about them. So we're going to start off with Serene.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Serene Sawaf, and I am born from MPAC. I used to work at MPAC as the Hate Crime Prevention Department Coordinator for 3 years, the Southern California Government Relations for another year, and all of that prompted me to pursue my law degree. And now I am an attorney at the Office of the City Attorney in Los Angeles, as well as a board member of the Muslim Bar Association. So that's me in a quick nutshell. I'm so happy to be back. MPAC is home, and I'm so honored to be with amongst you.
Mahmoud.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I have to say that. So my name is Mahmoud Al-Fara. I'm from Mission Viejo, grown up in Southern Orange County for basically my entire life. I'm also a part of an organization called OC Students for City Council, where we try to push for young progressive students to run for city council spots throughout the entire county, to push for an agenda to unite to end homelessness, create more affordable housing, fight for working and middle-class families, and create a more sustainable environment for our future. And the whole process of running for city council, although we fell a little short to the finish line, it's been a great experience, and I'll definitely take it on future endeavors, inshallah. And yeah, thank you for having me also well.
Just in case you missed that, he ran for Mission Viejo City Council, and just a few days ago fell a little bit short, but we do have high hopes for your future in representing our community. Thank you. And we have Connie.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
It's an honor to be with all of you, and I've been with MPAC for how many years? About 15 years, and it's been a wonderful journey, and I'm still learning, but it's great to be with you. I'm an old civil rights war horse, and I've been litigating for a long time, but I've also been called an inside agitator before moving inside and helping police. I used to sue, and now I'm an advisor to them. So both inside and outside, but pushing for the advancement of justice wherever I can. I'm just honored to be here with you on the Muslim American journey, and learning from you, and hopefully a few of my mistakes you can learn from as well. Thank you.
Mustafa.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Mustafa Alemi. I'm born and raised in San Diego, California. It's an honor to be here with these esteemed panelists. I just graduated from San Diego State University, where I studied politics. I did a lot of activism, primarily on like minority underrepresentation within our university and the BDS movement, so the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. And I also spent a summer working as a CLDP fellow, which is a program that MPAC runs. So I worked.
What does that stand for?
The Congressional Leadership Development Program. So if there's any young people, you should definitely apply to that. So I was in the office of a Democratic member of the House of Representatives. And yeah, planning on going to law school, inshallah, applying next year after completing a Fulbright fellowship. But yeah.
And Omar Hakim.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Umar Hakim. I'm the director for Intellect, Love, and Mercy Foundation based in South Los Angeles. We've been established since 1998. I'm a Compton resident, so it wasn't a hard trek to get over here, just 5 minutes. My mother's from Guyana. She got here in 1966. And through her becoming a citizen, she taught us all about education. So this is one of the main reasons that I'm with the M Foundation, because we teach life skills to replace social ills, and we do it through community organizing, Humanitarian Day, and Go Beyond the Game, which is a football camp for gratitude, attitude, motivation, and education. And I'm also the board chair for LA Voice. Did everybody vote?
Yes.
You did? Are you satisfied with it? There you go. There you go. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So did everyone pay attention to that motto for the Elm Foundation? Teaching life skills To address
social ills.
to what? Social ills? To address social ills. All right. So this is a wonderful group of people, some of whom have deep experience and some of whom have deep energy and some experience. But I wanted to ask, to start off the discussion today, a bit of a philosophical question regarding the topic of engagement. So what's the difference between engagement and resistance? How would you frame that? Because sometimes our community is on the outside and is focused on protest and on activities of boycott and things that are seen as kind of outside the system, and then the others that are focused on working within the system. So how would you characterize the two different approaches and the difference between them? So let's start with Connie.
Excellent question. Engagement and resistance, this is how I think of it, it may be helpful, may not be. They are different tactics for achieving a strategy. And I think sometimes we can get a little twisted around fighting over tactics when, if your mission, for example, is to end Islamophobia, your strategy is to normalize Islam as one of the many great religions that are part of the American tapestry, and to integrate American Muslims and Muslim immigrants into the American tapestry. That's your strategy. Your tactics at any given time can be protest, resistance, war through litigation, revolution if you've got the guns to do it, or it can be education, media campaigns, it can be civic engagement, it can be running elections and running for office. So those are all tactics that allow you to execute your strategy in order to achieve your mission. And I think that a lot of advocates mix those three levels up and they get confused. I've been on the outside. Litigation is war with paper. And I've been on the inside. And I've been called an inside agitator, and Tom Hayden said Connie's gone to the dark side when I started helping LAPD, and it was true. But for that specific time, it was time to move inside. We battled them for a good 60 years, and we finally brought them down, and we could move inside to do hearts and minds work. You can't do hearts and minds work with the tactic of litigation. You have to do engagement and persuasion and seduction as an inside game. So I think that it's the full arsenal of what you need to achieve your mission. There's no conflict. It's a matter of what's needed at what particular time in the battle.
There's no conflict between engagement versus resistance, inevitably. And just for the record, you were talking about revolution and arms. She's not advocating that one on this panel here today. Just needed to make clear on that one.
Don't be scared.
With a name like Jihad, I'm extra tuned in to those discussions. Omar, you want to add something?
It's definitely a balance between the two, because resistance, you live in a state of resistance. You fight every day to have a good day, to have a good life, and at the same time, civic engagement is more of a strategy. So
hold the mic a little bit closer, so everyone.
So this is more like the conversation, the organizer and the community activist. There's a difference between the two. In my opinion, the community organizer is more strategic, mobilizing the people, doing canvassing, exploration. The activist is the one who shows up and protests, but you can't have one without the other. You need the community activists to agitate the system. Then you come in or partner with that same person at your level, wherever you at. You may be in the city, you may have a relationship with LAPD, you may have a relationship with the government. You agitate them there too with the same message. So there's a practice of civility that has to be aligned in that to stay in the balance of everything.
Like from what Omar said, it really is a balance between engagement and resisting. And I really think the resistant aspect of things come into play when you feel like your rights are being oppressed and when you need to stand up for what you believe in and really make sure your elected officials are being held accountable. Now, when you get to that state of point, when you really want to progress and move forward, that's when you get the engagement sense of things. We have a problem in this country where youth don't get involved in the government aspect of things, where we tend to vote in very small numbers. That's just statistically speaking. But in order to get them more involved, you have to do engagement with them through canvassing, phone banking, and giving them a reason to go out there and vote. In this last election, we had 31% of youth voter turnout, which is all-time high, I think, and very, very big. And I think the resistance aspect, if you can point it and make it look good to where getting young people involved so that they don't have to resist in the future, that creates a better form of engagement.
And we'll go to Mustafa in a second, but I just want to drill down on that. If you heard him say 31% youth participation in voting this last election, here locally in Southern California or nationally?
Nationally.
Nationally. And he said it with such like enthusiasm. We got 31%. 31% is less than 1/3 of the youth vote. So there's a lot of work to be done to raise that number and truly get involvement. Mustafa.
Yeah, just going back a bit to the question you asked in terms of the difference, just in case people have like trouble with that, I would say I consider engagement working with and within systems of power within the country. So that typically is in the shape of like electoral politics, and it's typically a top-down process, and then resistance is working outside of these systems of these structures of power that are in the United States. So like Omar mentioned, grassroots activism, so it's usually bottom up. So that's what I would, just for people who might not be familiar with the terms, it just has to do with, which, are you working within these systems? Are you trying to, improve them from the inside? Or are you on the outside putting pressure on them, trying to force these systems to change the way you want them to change?
Serene, yeah, please.
And I'll just add one thing, which is I think often, maybe many of us on this panel start in one area. So we might start with engagement. And then there's a tipping point where you feel perhaps that you're not making the impact that you think needs to be made. And I've found my own self, I've shifted to resistance. So it often takes place, I mean, it's not just a black and white, I think there's a scale. And how we even define it, I was thinking about, okay, what is engagement, what is resistance? Is a lawyer resisting? We might also be engaging because we are engaging in the system set before us, which is to apply the law and demand application of fairness, justice, all the good stuff that comes with what we're fighting for, but within an institution, the judiciary. So, because I often think resistance, legal, fight, 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 but I also think it actually does wear an engagement hat, because sometimes the only way to be heard is to engage with a very fierce voice.
Yeah, Omar, go ahead.
Let's put this in a pop culture sense. I know you watch movies, because I watch a lot of movies. Captain America is civic engagement. The Hulk is resistance. You see what I'm saying? Batman is resistance. Superman is civic engagement. So this is the difference. You got the Justice League, then you got the Death Squad. Two different things.
Yeah.
You can clap for that.
That's great. I guess maybe I'm not making the right distinctions here. The resistance can be in the cultural realm. It can be with so you can have resistance. It doesn't have to be just through litigation. You can resist with a movie that changes people's minds. You can resist by putting out an electoral message that completely reframes something and forces the electorate to focus in a different way. So the dichotomy, it is a sliding scale. It is at the different levels, and you can actually deploy different flanks of your army, of your activists, of your engagers. When I do a lawsuit, that's my way of saying I want a relationship. That's engaging, but it also can be seen as war. And so I think maybe the important distinction is to decide where are you in the particular phase of your strategy, and what's going to work the best given the relationships that you have and given where you are in that strategy. If you're done with the litigation and you've done what you can and you're now inside and you're saying, okay, now it's hearts and minds. We've gotten them to comply with the law, but no court can order a cop to look at a black kid and say, you know what, instead of trying to lock him up, I think I'm going to try and save him. That's hearts and minds work. You can't do that with a lawsuit. So you move to persuasion. And it can be through media, it can be becoming an advisor, it can be engaging culturally, putting them through different training. So you're using all of the above. And you just have to know where you are in your battle as to which arrow you take out of your quiver. And you've got all of them, everything from persuasion to war with paper, I'll put it that way.
Very good. And I want to get deeper into some of the conflicts that arise between the people who engage in the different tactics in a moment. But before that, I wanted to ask the very fundamental or basic question based on something that Mustafa said, or Mahmoud said, sorry, that 31% of young people are involved. What are the barriers to being involved either in engagement or resistance? What are the things that you have to overcome to motivate someone to be involved in the first place?
Yeah, so in this country especially, we have a lot of politicians who use voter suppression to stop people from potentially, exercising their First Amendment right to go out and vote. But a way to get people more involved in voting and maybe getting over that hump, besides the little tactics of it, is to give them a reason to vote. Telling them that the reason why politicians aren't listening to young people for tuition-free college or creating a more sustainable environment is because we don't go out and vote. And politicians only listen to those who vote. And that's just the sad reality of things. But if you start to vote in mass numbers, which was what happened with 31% of the youth, we still have a long way to go in our entire country, not just the young people. But if you can start getting them more to vote, politicians are going to start listening to them more. If we have minority groups such as Hispanics, Latinos, Muslims, African Americans, as long as we keep voting and we keep pushing that pendulum forward, politicians are going to listen to us and push for progressive ideals, which is in all going to help out this society.
So that's a very rational and reasonable, coherent argument for why someone should be involved. Why isn't it working? Omar, you're on the ground, or yeah. Go ahead, Mustafa.
I think on the point of engagement, speaking, from the Muslim community, I think it comes down to like apathy and distrust with these, systems. The Muslims, at least the immigrant Muslim community, is like a newer community, right? So we're still, establishing ourselves. So I think there's distrust with these systems. So, when you try to get Muslims or other communities as well, immigrant communities to engage with these systems, there's a lot of distrust. So I think that's one of the biggest hurdles to at least the tactic of engagement is, you'll hear things like, that's not like for us, that's not what we do, or, these, Congress and stuff, like, that's not for us. But I think that's slowly changing, just 2-3 days on Tuesday, we had all these first time, individuals being elected to Congress. So I think that's slowly going away, but I think the biggest hurdle with engagement, at least, is, developing, people's faith in these institutions that, these are for us. We are Americans, we have the right to, run for Congress, we have the right to, meet with our representatives and whatnot. But maybe Omar can also speak to, hurdles with resistance as well.
To get young people in, I want to pick up, as Cardi, she hit me when she said something. Strategy is very important. As being a community organizer, you do this thing what we call, where's your power at? Your power, in the business world, it's probably called power analysis or SWOT, you know what I'm saying? So, but you got to do your power analysis, and when you find out who's holding your power.
The SWOT analysis, explain that one too.
These look like some smart people. Strengths,
Nonetheless,
weaknesses,
yeah.
Opportunities, threats, and trends. Each one is a column. Each one describes the strength, the weakness, the opportunity, the threat, or the trend that has something to do with the project or topic. Is that a good one? Okay. So,
So you apply that analysis to your movement, to your
yes.
organization?
Yes. So in this power analysis, you have to find out who is holding your power. So if the power is in City Hall, then you may have to say, hey, I know somebody in there that could get me a meeting with such and such, that could get me a meeting with such and such that eventually lead to the power. Or if your power is in the White House, we all gonna be outside with signs and resistance because there ain't nothing you could tell that White House. So it's like you have to know where your power is and know how to get it, because if you don't know where your power or who's holding your power, it's gonna be kind of hard to develop your strategy, because in today's world, everybody else is holding our power.
I think that's a really good frame for this, because it's hard to tell people to engage in a system when everybody knows the fundamental corruption of that system. But it's a dilemma, or it's a catch-22, because if we don't get engaged, the corruption will only get deeper and deeper. We will lose what's left of the framework of our democracy. Look what it took to get us this engaged. We're on the brink of losing constitutional democracy if these institutions get eroded anymore and the rule of law gets flouted. So we're in a fundamental struggle, and it's hard to tell people who have been marginalized and who haven't been benefiting from a system, now you got to go out and save it. Well, what for? It hasn't helped me. So it's the mistrust, it's the corruption, but here's the thing, it's still a viable framework, because if all of us band together in a strategy to hold on to the democracy and then advance the justice that MPAC is about and that many of the other groups up here are about, then you can actually aggregate. Right now we have minority rule. We've allowed minority rule to absolutely put extremism into our body politic and into control of our systems. And I think the American public is now, so it's hard when you said it was logical and we were being very rational, and you've got lawyers and activists up here and we're very strategic. Well, politics is often a game of fear. It's brainstem. Mm-hmm. And this is a culture war. And we're talking about facts and law and systems and institutions, but this is a culture war, and that's emotional. And so you have to fight a culture war with a more sophisticated deployment of your emotional and persuasive arguments. You don't want to get down in the gutter with a pig because you'll just get dirty, and he likes getting dirty, right? You can't go low. But you've got to be able to counter brainstem with a more powerful emotional, because the lawyers aren't going to do you any good in a culture war. We can fight in a court, but this is a culture war.
So before you jump in there, on that, I want to drill down a little bit. Your response so far has been analytical, et cetera, and cerebral. What is the emotional counterpunch to the feeling that you're left with, whether it's because of Russian interference or the very reality of the corruption of our system that just leaves you in the historical reality or the historical experience of feeling marginalized and not benefiting from the system as it is? What's the emotional counterweight to that disenfranchising feeling that people have?
It's extremely powerful. We've got stories. We're trying to preserve the essence of this democracy. The emotional appeal is that we owe the people who sacrifice their lives so that we can stand where we are. For the African American community, you heard Oprah Winfrey when she talked about Otis Moss, and he walked 18 miles to vote, and every place he was in, boy, you're at the wrong place, boy, you're at the wrong place, and finally he walks to the last of his 18 miles, and boy, the polls are closed. Well, when you tell African Americans that story, you're saying there's an historical debt. When you talk to poor whites who have been marginalized and have been completely left behind and who are now retaliating by putting a wrecking ball into our politics, you have to address their deficit, what they're missing, with an economic strategy that actually lifts everybody from who have been left at the bottom of the well. It's an emotional appeal to, you're right, we've left you behind, we're not going to do that. We're going to actually get an action plan instead of exploiting your vote to simply channel more money to the top 1%, which is what you've been used for. That's the emotional appeal. Now, that's not a lawyer's argument. But it's based in fact, it's based in genuine care, it's based in compassion, it's based in our values that aren't about hate and destruction and tearing down others and otherizing everybody from Muslims to African Americans to Jews. We have to stop the otherization and make poor whites and those who feel like they have to wreck the system in order to be counted to say, you're right, we haven't heard you. Guess what? We need to do a plan that's a grand alliance of all of us to make the American promise real. That's emotional, but it's also honest, and it's also high level.
Beautiful. I want to hear from you.
Yeah, so I think another strategy of just getting more people out to vote and expressing that right is to seeing other people like you going out and doing that same thing, such as running for office or actually voting. After the tragic shooting that happened in Parkland, Florida, when I saw people my age getting out and getting involved, that inspired myself to get more involved. And then when I found out that 2 other guys around my age were running in San Clemente, I wanted to run too. And then it was just this chain reaction where if you see other people just like you, it destroys apathy and it inspires, you have that empathetic voice to it where you can say, that could be me one day. Or why do I not get involved if these groups of people are getting involved? So it's getting to that point where you have someone else stand up for what they believe in and everyone will follow, such as the youth, such as minority groups, and that figure.
So before we hear from Serene, I want to plant the seed, and maybe Serene can address it as well, to the question, because we heard a very powerful story that Oprah told that was recounted by Connie, that was a story of us, that we have this historical debt that helps us reimagine who it is that we are, that inspires us and touches us at an emotional level. What is the Muslim American story? And I granted we have intersectionality, I mean we have multiple identities. We might be Arab, Indo-Paki, we might be Latino or African American or Caucasian. We have, we might be immigrant, we might be second, third generation, et cetera. What is our story? Is there a story? What is that emotional appeal that we have as American Muslims? But go ahead, Serene. You can address that or whatever you were going to say first.
I was going to, I think we have multiple stories. I don't think we just have one story because I think the immigrant Muslim community has a different story than the Black community that has been here and seen systematic oppression far longer than what we have seen and experienced. I was going to add earlier to the prior question, I think also it's important to identify how can you play a role to defeat the apathy, right? So often I think young people, older people, people across the board, you ask, okay, get out and vote. What's the purpose? Why? Or why should I engage? What's the problem? But it's to shine a light on an impact, how people make an impact so that they can see there's hope. And an example just comes to my mind as the travel ban. January 27th, 2017, Trump signs an order, and people in mid-flight are impacted by that order. It was outrageous, unconstitutional, and that's why they had to tweak it for a second and a third time to finally survive.
By we, you mean him. But go ahead.
Right, him. But but it was people looking and going, okay, what role can I play? And I'll say myself, reading about one situation after another, one executive order after another, it was maddening. And then stopping and going, wait, what can I do? What can I bring to the table? Get in your car and go out and help. And that's what several attorneys just did. They descended on LAX and New York and named the airports just to fight because we are a nation that welcomes immigrants. We aren't one that unconstitutionally strips them in midair of what rights they had. So I think it's important to shine light on those stories so that we can also defeat apathy.
Beautiful. A story? Someone want to inspire us? What is our story?
Emmett Till. Emmett Till was a young man who was accused of whistling at a white woman, and then she later said she lied. Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street is a town in Ohio, I think it was Oklahoma. And this is where African Americans had reached the point of sustainability in this country. Banks, hospitals, stores, schools. Again, a white person didn't like it, and they shut the town down, burnt it down to the ground, omitted the story from the news. It didn't become popular again till like the Black movement. Rosewood, you all seen the movie. Jim Crow. So this narrative did not start in 1965. This narrative was going on before 1965. I have a sister in the front row by the name of Hassan. She was one of the first women to enter the prison system giving dawah, or an invitation to the dean. We have Martin Luther King. It wasn't just a dream, it was a blueprint. It was a blueprint on how to navigate this situation. You know, so we have to, I think someone said, stop otherizing. And I want you to really look at your own narratives and stop comparing it to someone else's and join that other person's narrative, because now we have to organize with a little bit of everybody. Because till this day, the FBI have not shut down any white supremacist groups. You feel me? They shut down the Black Panthers. They dropped a bomb on Philadelphia in the Black community. So what I'm saying is, it's time that we start organizing with one another and stop looking at each other as an ultimate. My culture is better than yours, or my gift of Islam is more higher than yours because I'm come from there. No, I was born into this struggle. When I came out the womb in 1970, I was already up against it. So
what I'm hearing is, for the 2/3 of the American Muslim community that are immigrants or the children thereof, we should plug into the movement that's already there in the civil rights struggle. We don't need to reinvent another movement and another story. Our story is your story.
That, and a lot of these stories happened to our community while we was Christian. So it wasn't just, this is how it correlates with one another. A lot of these things happened to us when Allah was raising us out of Christianity into Islam. So, you know, this is why it's really important to connect with the other faiths. This is why it's really, because we share the same struggle.
Mustafa and then Connie?
And I would, if I could
Connie,
be
then
so
Mustafa.
bold as to suggest, you have something to teach us, because you've done something as American Muslims. You have already done e pluribus unum, out of the many one, across the many countries of origin, types of Islam. You have an e pluribus unum lesson to teach the Americans. And your community is the solution to the international issues. You are the tip of the spear for a movement that is the solution. So you have a story that is intimately connected with the American core of pluralistic democracy, and you've demonstrated it by this movement, by the way you live in this country as multiple countries of origin coming together as one. And nowhere else in the world has that been done. So you have something to teach us, and your story, that's a modern story. I'm sure you have ancient stories that I know nothing about that also feed into this, as Umar was saying. So don't underestimate the power of your trek, your journey in this country, even today in the last 30 to 50 years. You have a very powerful narrative that's part of the American tapestry. It just hasn't been lifted up. It hasn't had a light shone on it. But that is what I have observed. That is what you have taught me. So understand, you have a narrative that is inspiring and that is critical to advancing us into the 21st century.
Beautiful. And I just want to highlight for those of you, some of you were here a couple of years ago at the MPAC convention, her words mirror or reflect or echo the sentiment of Van Jones when he said at the banquet dinner that night that American Muslims are in a unique position to both be a beacon of light for the world, the Muslim world, to show the Muslim world internationally how to contribute to the betterment of the world in which we live, but also we have something to share in terms of the e pluribus unum, the diversity of our various racial, national origin, ethnic groups, how we can get along. And we still have a ways to go in that regard, but we're ahead of the curve in terms of the mainstream of the American society. We have something to offer the spirit of what it means to be American. And that's what I'm hearing in your comments just now that reminded me of those comments a couple of years ago from Van Jones. Mustafa.
Yeah, just one thing I was going to add. Absolutely agree with Omar and Connie in terms of the Muslim community, reaching to the Black community struggles. The only thing I would add is that I think for immigrant Muslims, America might not feel like home for whatever reason, but the reality is we've been here for decades. Individuals like Mahmoud and myself, born and raised in California, that's what we know. And even within the Islamic tradition, somewhere where you can practice your faith freely and you're there, that's where you consider home is home. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was from Mecca, but when he times got tough and he went to Medina, that became his ultimate home. But he was a foreigner to that place initially. So the Muslim American community originally were coming as foreigners with the immigrants, and then the Muslim slaves that came over beforehand. But now we're here, we can practice our faith freely, and I think it's with our younger generation, the older generation as well, we're reaching the point where we recognize this is home now, and it's time for us to recognize that, engage with that, and that there's no conflict with the Islamic tradition in that sense. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And I think to go off of that point, I was born in 1999, natural-born American citizen my entire life. 9/11 happened 2 years later. So I grew up in a community, South Orange County, very far to the right, whatever you want to call it. I grew up in a community of prejudice, where you get used to it. So you get used to being called this, you get used to being called that, and to the point where you think, why should I ever get involved in my community? They're only going to see me as this. I'm just as American as anyone else. There is no difference. The only difference is my background and where that comes from. But this is the United States of America. We allow for this to happen. We allow the diversity, which is what makes this country great. And we have to keep reminding our elected officials that regardless of skin color, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of sexual orientation or immigration status, we all are protected by the Constitution in this country, and we all deserve a right. And sometimes we forget about that. And that's when, going all the way back to the first point, that's when the resistance comes, and we keep pushing and charging and trying to just keep moving forward, but never be disenfranchised. I had a conversation with this one guy in Los Angeles when I went to Roscoe's, and there was some great food there. But I talked to him because I told him I was from Orange County, and he said he had a Colorado shirt. I said, "Oh, did you like Colorado or Oklahoma? Excuse me. Did you like Oklahoma when you went there?" And he looked at me. He's like, "Hell no, that was racist." When he was in Oklahoma, all he was subject to was racism every single day. And so when you get subject to that, your whole mindset's just, nobody likes me. The government is out to get me, especially when you have, your executive doing the same thing. So the problem is people get disenfranchised and don't think they have a voice. And you have to show them that there is a voice, that there is light, and that you can get involved and make a difference. And that's what I want.
Perhaps part of our narrative.
It's all right. You can clap when you feel so inspired. All right, go ahead, Sidi.
2 cents, which is perhaps part of our narrative could be extracted from the Quran, because the verse that says it all, I think. I've created you in nations and tribes to get to know one another. So how can we be a beacon of light in this country? There's no difference amongst any of us. I mean, we are all in the same struggle, and we are striving for the betterment of our families, our children, wealth, so economic status, ethnicities, religions, cultures are really irrelevant. We are irrelevant in a negative, if we're looking at it in a negative sense, but enriching if we are to recognize them as we are instructed to do in the Quran. And that perhaps can be part of our story.
As an organizer, my job is to agitate. So if I say something that agitates you, just keep in mind, diamonds are born under pressure. So I became a better person in 1998 when I accepted Al-Islam, because now I started fusing my narrative of who I was to this point, learning a whole nother lifestyle to become. And one thing I've learned is do not be afraid to be Muslim. You could do it with hijab, without hijab, with the kufi, without a kufi, but it's all in your heart. And when I started learning more about other people, I started appreciating what I've learned in my master's program is strategic moral diplomacy. When you start to learn about the other moral universe, tie things together to create a win-win situation. So yes, it's a must that you start at home. Do you know your neighbors? This is interactive. Do you know your neighbors? You do.
She said that she tried, but the neighbors aren't so responsive.
Yeah, well, it starts at home. It starts at home. Start with your neighbors. Find the common ground in between you and build from there. Like I cut my neighbor's grass. Well, she used to have grass. It's all dirt now, but I used to cut this little patch of grass, Nika, Hispanic lady, and she was so appreciative of that service. So it's the small kindnesses that we could do with one another. I'm sure the politicians know about this. The small kindnesses that you do for your constituency that'll bring them closer to you.
I think all of you all have been involved in, I lived in Texas, all y'all have been involved in resistance at some level, whether it's legally or through organizing, community organizing. You've been on the outside. And I venture to say that all of you have also been on the inside, whether it's a congressional internship or running for office or working in the DA's office, also working with city government and local government. And also you, Omar, you're partnering with government programs and you've been involved both on the outside and the inside. Give insight into the challenge of perception between those who are emotionally tied to resistance and resistance only because it's so corrupt that anyone who's affiliated with the power structure is a sellout, is a collaborator in a negative sense, is somehow undermining the representation that they're supposed to have of us, whatever the us group is. That's a real issue. Help walk us through what the challenge is before we get to the addressing what the solution might be. What is that challenge? What is your experience in that regard? Be somewhat specific as well.
I guess I'll start it off. So that speaks to I think a very real experience that I think a lot of people face. So for context, I went to San Diego State University and was part of Students for Justice in Palestine all 4 of my years. But at the same time, after I think 2 years, I joined our student government on the board of directors. And from certain people, I got a lot of kickback, because they were kind of our student government was viewed as the establishment, the enemy, so to speak. So then entering that was, kind of controversial. So that's just to give a context to a very real problem. And then that's just at a university level. And then you can take that to, a bigger level where there's, prominent Muslim leaders maybe who start from, positions within the community, and then, they, reach positions within, different establishments and institutions. So I think.
So you're getting called a sellout, you're part of the enemy. I mean, how, give me a little more
sellout,
of the experience.
Thankfully not enemy, I never got called the enemy. Definitely sellout a little bit. But then, just a lot of questioning, why'd you do that? You were against them originally, and, they're the ones causing the problems. And I think just through conversations.
Suspicion, name-calling.
Right.
Before we get to the solution,
Right.
I want you to walk us through the visceral, the emotional
definitely.
experience that you faced in that circumstance.
Kind of like a social climber, trying to just, you use the community and then, you climb up to the position that you want.
Did people cut ties with you? Were you ostracized? I mean, what's the
No,
extent?
they didn't. No, it wasn't to that level. I mean, I know individuals out like above the university level who have experienced that. With national issues and whatnot. Thankfully, not at the university level. Actually, there was one person who I wasn't that cool with them anyway, so it was fine. But yeah, that is just pointing out the challenges. That is like a very real challenge that activists
I mean, it's
face.
questioning your intention, because before
Right.
you were representing us, now you're just speaking for yourself. You're just trying to enrich yourself or have some kind of prestige or profile or something, right? You face that. Anyone else want to jump in?
I can add to that.
Go
When
ahead,
I worked at MPAC, I got it a lot. I was part of the Multicultural Advisory Committee with the FBI. Astaghfirullah, like that was so offensive because why? People, friends of mine, dear friends till now, would say, you're being used. They're just there, they're profiling you and they're taking that and they're doing something that you have no idea, but it's happening and you're contributing to part of the problem as to being part of the solution. There was also, yes, you're trying to speak on behalf of a community, but you don't represent us. MPAC doesn't represent us, was what they would say. Ironically, they didn't know what MPAC actually did, but until I had to educate them. But so I think the distrust and the ostracizing was, and probably still is till today, rampant. And unfortunately, I think it's coming out of ignorance, personally. We don't want to switch to solutions yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
I agree with, yeah, you're going to be ostracized. Sometimes you'll be excommunicated altogether. But I think sometimes people confuse, they get wed to a tactic and forget what's needed to advance the strategy. And so the biggest conflict I had was when I had to help get rid of a charismatic African-American police chief of LAPD. And he was from Central Casting. He could have been one of America's greatest chiefs, but he was bluer than blue. And he was of the old Gates culture. And while he was extremely intelligent, and I enjoyed suing him, I liked opposing him, and I did hand-to-hand combat with him. I had fun. It is fun to fight. It's fun to do litigation. I had a ball. I'd wake up every morning figuring out a new way to sue LAPD, all right? Had a good time, and I'm good at it, okay? Won every case, all right? You would have been my opposing counsel, okay?
I'm not in that division.
You're not in that division, so I wouldn't have been arguing against her. But yes, so you can get wed to fighting. But once they got broken with the Rampart scandal, the gangster cop scandal, that's when I knew that they had been finally broken and the end of LAPD's impunity was at hand. And I had to switch, because that was when the window opened or the right wave came in. You had to know to catch that wave and go inside, because transformation can't happen from the outside. The only time
Can you repeat that again? Can you repeat that?
Transformation can't happen from a purely outsider strategy alone. Not unless you're doing revolution, and I do mean war. That's what we're talking about here today. But when you have a framework that allows you perfectibility, that gives you tools to fight without violence, you use them. One of the strategies is to protest, lawsuits, you're fighting, right? When the time to end the fighting comes, you have to have a few people who can afford to lose the social connection. It doesn't matter if I'm excommunicated. I'm asocial. I hope you don't invite me to the New Year's party. I don't want a small talk. I'm not interested in fellowshipping. I'm a loner, okay? So loners can afford that social, but when I went up against that police chief, and the mayor called me and he said, I'm gonna fire him, but I can't do it if the top civil rights lawyer doesn't back me. And so I went into gear. I wrote op-eds, I did my blitzkrieg. At the time, there were like 4 TV stations, so I could own them. Now I wouldn't know what to do because I don't social media. I don't face snap, I don't do any of that. None of it, Snapchat,
Face
whatever.
snap, I love it.
Smart face, none of it.
I don't social media as a verb, I love it.
Social media. So I wouldn't have been able to do that. But back then, I could saturate. So I blitzkrieged, I was on TV, I was arguing for the 11 reasons why Bernard Park should not be reappointed, went into black churches and got stuff thrown at me. But when I walked in there alone, into the lion's den, I couldn't have been stronger. And I had the arguments. I had the facts. I had the law. I had his history. They were seduced by his charismatic presence. And this is a guy who opposed every civil rights lawsuit we filed, okay? I was glad to get rid of him, and he was the obstacle, the critical path for the strategy. I was wed to the strategy, to the mission, not to my tribe. And you have to understand, you're going to pay a very, very high price for that. But because we did that, there were two of us who did it, but because we did that, we got a transformative chief in there, Bratton, and then Beck. And it's not your grandfather's LAPD. We have a long way to go. Black Lives Matter is absolutely right. But you have to have both. You need the outside fighters, but when you get a chance to go inside and you have a chance, transformation only happens when you have unlikely alliances. You can get marginal change as an outsider. You can win lawsuits. I've won dozens of them. You get a consent decree, you get temporary change, and as soon as the decree is over, they go right back to their DNA, okay? Permanent change, hearts and minds change, is an inside game. And when you get the chance to go in, one or two of you, or one or two of us, we have to move inside, because guess what? If you don't show them how to do it, it won't happen.
Beautiful. All right. Before you weigh in, Omar, one other aspect that I didn't hear mentioned yet is not just suspicion or self-interest, it's also this naivete, which I think you touched upon a little bit. You're just being used. You're just being, you think you're going to make a difference, but you're just going to be, chewed up and spit out by the system, and you're not going to move the needle at all. How do you know when that moment is? Like you said, I saw an opportunity where real change could happen. How do you, is it an instinct? Is it just how do you come to that point? Because you can't necessarily just rely on the popular sentiment of your community who's maybe acting out of a visceral, emotional standpoint. They don't necessarily see the strategic opportunities as they arrive. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I made it a point to plan and prepare before every meeting. My meeting wasn't to socialize and drink coffee and have tea and be part of a group. My meeting was to raise certain issues. I would usually have 2 to 3 issues, and that was my purpose for being. And anytime I saw the meeting going in different directions, I would try to
You're talking about your
rail
FBI.
back. Yes, I'm so sorry. When I was with the Multicultural Advisory Committee with MPAC, we did it with the Sheriff Baca at that time. We did it with LAPD, DHS. So we had these different groups we would meet with. But I think in order to prevent yourself being wooed and swooned, then, which I saw, by the way, happening, there were several organizations invited, and oftentimes people just showed up and, patted each other on the back and enjoyed each other's company. But to me, to MPAC, it meant going in with a purpose and raising particular issues. Otherwise, why am I here? And keeping that in mind the entire time so that you're not, being used.
Beautiful. Omar.
In the African American community, because of its origins in the Nation of Islam, we're taught general orders. The first general order is to take your post and take responsibility for everything around it. The second is not to leave your post until properly relieved. So in today's world, there were certain posts established and certain organizations were assigned to these posts. Because you disagree doesn't mean you leave your post. You stay at that post and you be just as resilient for when that opportunity come up, as Sister Rice said, when that opportunity come up, you voice your opinion, because everybody heard this statement: if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And then when you feel like you're on the menu, you come with this outside strategy for those who stayed at the table and negotiated their rights or or whatever contract that's being, policy that's being created, negotiated their rights in that policy. Those who left the table don't know about the conversation that happened on the inside. And so in this balance, for me, I had to practice shura. I had to go around to all my elders, all the stakeholders of our organization, and say, look, yada, 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 woo, 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 this, that, and the other is happening. What do you think? They told me, hold your post. Stay at the post until you properly relieve. And if we don't relieve you, that means we got your back. So you have to have some type of moral, you have to find out, you have to be transparent in your position, let everybody know what you're doing, and even go to the opposing organizations and let them know what you're doing. So the answer to that, it's a balance. It's a balance that you as an individual must, and then, this is what I thought about. You can't let either side push you into something that you don't morally want to do. Because if the pros push you into something that you don't want to do, they're gonna say you cooning out or you selling out. And if the cons say we want you to do this for you, it's the same thing. But you're doing it for them, you know what I'm saying? So you can't let nobody take you out of your pocket or away from your mission, your vision, or focus. It's a tough balance. I believe you could tell we're talking about someone we really beating around the bush, you know what I'm saying? But I believe if there's a collective vision, then you can have two sides going at the same thing in different ways. But when there's a lack of vision in the community or a situation, and when the opportunity comes up that you don't like, you're gonna take different sides.
I agree totally with that, and I would also say, and I think, Serene, you know this from having been at those tables, it's like Aretha Franklin's song, Who's Zooming Who? Because it's mutual co-optation. Don't delude yourself. When you move to the inside game, you are going to co-opt each other. And I tell the outside agitators I left behind, my ACLU co-litigators, I say, when I start crossing a line, let me know. That's the check you're talking about. But make no mistake about it. They're changing me as much as I'm changing them. But without that relationship, I couldn't have gone to Mike Downing and said, what the Hades are you doing profiling mosques? This is going to be seen as mosque profiling. You cannot do this. I know you're bedazzled by the data and the mapping and stuff, but you can't do this. You're forgetting the human element here. Think about what this is going to communicate post 9/11 to the Muslim American communities in this region. You can't do this. And he changed it, right? Because of your advocacy, because of our advocacy. Had we not been on the inside, it wouldn't have been changed. So there's a huge price to be paid personally. There's a price to be paid organizationally and strategically. But sometimes that's the price that has to be paid, because it's the unlikely alliances that really advance the ball. And sometimes you're not in a position to do that. There's no communication. Your neighbor won't talk to you. Well, you can't force her to talk to you. Okay, move to another strategy. But once you're in the inside game, you're going to be accused of being co-opted. I said, yeah, I've been co-opted. The price to be paid is worth it if you get results. If you're not getting any results, you're just being used. But I'll be willing to be used if you give me what the community and what the justice agenda needs. I'm willing to be used. But you can't be used with no results. And I think that's the balance, that's the calculation.
Connie addressed it a little bit. I want you to now start sharing with us some strategies to deal with that ostracization or the negative pressure that you feel when you do decide to make that strategic move inside.
Yeah, so I think going off the point of when do you get involved to create change, from my experience, from a couple months of running for office, you never really know when to go. You just do it. You just have to, sometimes on blind faith, but you just have to believe in yourself and try to achieve that goal. And running for office at a young age, obviously you get people saying you're too young, you're inexperienced, especially with a name like Mahmoud Al-Farah. People are going to say some other things around that as well. But you just have to keep on moving, keep on pushing, because people will follow. And there were some dark times throughout the campaign, but I was lucky enough to have a campaign manager who also graduated the same class as me. And it was just me and him behind a laptop trying to figure out how can we change Mission Viejo for the better. And although it didn't end up with success, we did end up getting nearly 6,000 votes. And And it goes off to the point of, am I not achieving the goal that you want to achieve? But you're pushing the pendulum, even if you don't think you are. Because if you're not an actor, you're never going to be a factor. So you have to do something to get involved, even if it's off blind faith, and even if your own family members are saying, it's just a waste of time, you shouldn't be doing this. Because at the end of the day, if you keep pushing, people will follow and you will make a difference.
Beautiful. All right, Sidine, go ahead.
I was just going to throw this back at maybe Connie or whoever. What if it's hard to really identify that the impact is being made, that change is happening? Because, I mean, I'm thinking back right now, it was over 10 years ago when I was at the table with the DHS folks saying, this whole list, this watch list, doesn't make any sense. And it was maybe a year ago when my husband and I and our 2 little boys were stopped and to the point and completely combed through everything we had, including the chips that my 3-year-old was eating at the moment, and tested and said there was a chemical exposure, there was some form of chemical substance.
It was the flaming Doritos.
Right.
That's what
the hot, spicy Doritos. But it just the lack of, it doesn't make any sense. It's completely illogical, but yet we were suspect. We had the 4 S's, and then it disappeared the next time we flew. And interestingly, we didn't fly with our kids, so maybe that's why our children were the suspects. I don't know. They do terrorize me, but I don't know. But the point is, it doesn't make any sense oftentimes, these programs that you see, the watch list, for example. And over 10 years ago, the conversations around them, and we thought we saw impacts, and then I re-experienced and said, I asked myself, was an impact really made? And I'm getting to the point of persistence, because I think that's something that I've found our community we're so impatient. We want results. We're in a fast food culture. We want to see results, and if we don't see results from one conversation, then it's not effective. Food for thought.
Yeah, so I mean, running for political office with change not coming as fast as you want, obviously I would have liked to win. But it takes time, especially in Southern Orange County, where we literally have people walking around openly being racist, and it's okay with that. People being okay with being openly racist, and that's a problem. So change comes, but dramatic change comes slowly. And once you get to that point, once you keep on pushing that pendulum, eventually it will come. So I guess just going off of blind faith and making sure that you stick to your values and your beliefs to push for that well-needed change. And I think that goes off the point of kind of just whether you're actually making a difference or not. Just kind of seeing how you're affecting the people around you and seeing how well they're being impacted.
And it's jagged. It's never, they say the arc of the universe bends towards justice. It's not really an arc. It's jagged. You go forward 3 steps, back 2, forward 8, back 8. It zigzags back and forth. In this last election, racism, raw David Duke level racism seemed to work in Georgia and Florida, but in the caravan, immigrant phobia that was generated didn't work in Kansas and Oklahoma. So even in the same election, you saw counter and progressive and counter-aggressive, regressive tendencies and impacts. And you have to ask yourself, when you're in the middle of these inside strategies, would it be worse if I were here, or would it be worse if I weren't here? Could it have actually gotten worse had we not been in communication and hadn't created these relationships? Now, you're not going to affect all 44 police agencies. You're not going to affect the feds and the state cops at the same time. But if you just get a couple of the leaders who are willing to say in the chiefs meeting, you know what? That's not what we did in this meeting with MPAC or CARE. That's not what we're trying with Connie Rice. That's not what we're doing in Watts. And we're finding, and it's actually pushing strategies that show your opponents that what they were trying to do was not only ineffective, but it was counterproductive. And what you're asking them to do actually makes them safer and more effective. And it's advocating for the change in terms that they need. It's also a matter of what the relative power is. They're more afraid of me than they would be from somebody who can't sue them and drag them into federal court. And they're more afraid of me because they needed me to change their leadership for that one police chief deposing. So when you take arrows, that's part of the co-option, but I had to see a result. I had to see a change in the training. I had to see more than just checklist compliance with a legal consent decree. I had to see them change and put in a program of cops, 50 cops, who would only be promoted for showing how they kept a kid out of jail, not put him in jail. I had to see them change incentives on a scale that was more than a pilot program. And for 9 years we got that, and we have the one unit in the United States. How do you change the hearts and minds of police so that they don't think that when they go to South Central they get to do a righteous shoot to get into SWAT? And that's how they think. So understanding what their needs are, I knew that I was reversing those incentives and changing that mentality. Had it just been a bunch of meetings with photo ops with the chief and inviting me to the academy and having me sit next to the chief and feel important, I don't care about that. I needed to have him put himself on the line with his cops to say, we're going in this direction. If I don't see that, I leave and I start attacking from the outside and file a lawsuit the next week.
Beautiful. Mustafa.
Yeah. So Serene mentioned, knowing when have you accomplished something, when you were working within, and then Omar mentioned, the idea of if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and I think that's a really good point. But I think also, especially as the Muslim American community, we need to be cognizant of just being satisfied with being at the table, because you could be at the table, but then they're going to order off the menu for you, and then they might order you pork, right? And you're not going to even know. So, and giving that like a real example, in 2014 when President Obama hosted the White House iftar, that's an amazing a milestone, for the United States. I mean, it was happening before that, but to continue that. But then and this is kind of the idea of getting too maybe complacent. President Obama being comfortable with defending Israel bombing Gaza in 2014. Right, where 1,400 civilians were killed, in a room full of Muslims, when it wasn't even like related to the event. So I think that kind of speaks to, not just being there, but also being able to order from the menu, metaphorically. So I think that's something the Muslim community, we're getting into these institutions and stuff, and I think that's something, we're going to develop and learn from. But I think that's something we all need to be cognizant of.
So thank you very much. We're winding down. We have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to summarize a few of the questions that I had prepared to ask you in the following way, and then I'll have you say a closing remark or comment as well. What do you do when there are organizations whose raison d'être, their whole purpose of existence, is to resist from the outside to the point that they're willing to, even from your own community, tear you down if you are seen as collaborating or being part of the inside, all right, engaging? How do you go about doing that? Now, you talked about, Omar, one solution, which was, this being in touch with even those who might be opposing organizations, et cetera, being humble and approaching the leadership, having that personal relationship, being transparent. But how do you go about engaging with, I guess, a systemic oppositional tendency within the communities, those that are only for inside, those that are only for, or only for engagement versus only for resistance? How do you navigate that territory, and what's the way forward?
For me, you have to remain authentic in your position. So like one day I could be in Jesse Owens Park organizing with the 90s. Or the next day I could be at the mayor's table. If you change up in either position, these two words are gonna come together and they're gonna be like you acting different. So you have to remain your authenticity in all your situations. And whatever got you to these tables, stay that person. Stay that person. If you hear something come across the table, that's not going to work for us. Instead of compromising or Like even now, I go to some of these meetings, and you have a couple of people in there just rah rah shit boom bah. I'm like, that's not gonna work for us. So you have to engage them in a manner that you deliver your message, a collective message that is so authentic that everybody could take a part, share in it. So, but yeah, you have to really stay the same person who you are in it, away and at the table. Because if not, it's gonna come back to haunt you. And then that's when they're gonna be like, okay, you cooning out, or you selling out, or whatever. So you really have to remain authentic in all spaces that you occupy and come with that message. For me, my message comes from the Quran. I stick to establish weight with justice and fall not short of balance. That's Surah 55, Ayat 9. So I make this my mission statement and apply this to my work.
Beautiful. And I should say, you can clap. I should say that one of the questions we got from the audience was, what is that moral framework that informs our engagement and or resistance? And I think you were addressing that intuitively in that answer. Anyone else want to weigh in on this one? How do we navigate a hostile organization that might be part of our community? How would we define that?
So when you have a hostile environment around you and you're just trying to advocate for peace, for lack of a better word, you have to make sure to show them that peaceful protest does work. That sometimes violence with violence isn't always going to be the answer, and that's only going to cause more terror and lead to a regressive movement rather than a progressive movement. So making sure you stay involved with the community and trying to put yourself in the anti-organization's shoes and trying to understand why are they doing this. So for example, when you went to your neighbor and they didn't want to talk to you, try to understand why is it that they're doing this. Some people just grow up in areas where they act a certain way and you just can't change it, and that's just the sad reality of things. But it is a lot easier to love than it is to hate. A lot easier. So if you can just show them that at the end of the day, you're still going to be there for them and that you're still pushing for a peaceful protest, then you can achieve them and get them on your side and show them that you are trying to make that difference, that you are trying to push for that change and that acceptance of everyone.
I would add.
You had authenticity and transparency, and empathy and understanding. And I would also say that often I will validate the criticism of me. I went down to Watts. This is the day I got up and said, "You light, bright, damn near white bitch. You left us here in a shooting gallery." And I said, "Yes, ma'am, you're absolutely right. Middle-class African Americans left poor African Americans behind. And you are absolutely right. Now I can either help or you can ask me to leave." And they asked me to stay. So being honest about your role in their oppression is very important. And honestly, understanding that you really can't walk a mile in their shoes because you just don't face what they face. But you can empathize and you can validate the feelings and you can explain your strategy. And you can say, this is why I'm doing this. I'm trying to advance to this goal. And we can't do it from here. So, but the main thing is that you have to be able to take it. You just have to be able to take the arrows. And if you can't, then don't do an insider strategy because you'll fold. If you can't take the criticism, you'll fold. But I think making very clear what the goal is and that you respect their strategy and explain yours. They may or may not respect it. They may still throw ours at you, but they'll have to think about it for a moment.
That point right there, you call them. You pick up your phone because you got them all on your contact list. You call them. This is what I'm doing. You know what I'm about. What do you think? That's one way of de-escalation, especially within the community. You call them and be like,
Yeah, but when they say, we think you shouldn't be involved in that, and you do it anyway, doesn't that just
give them
inflame
your
things?
why.
Okay.
You give them your why and you show them your plan. These are the goals I'm trying to reach. Or else, give me what I'm going for. You can reach out to them and ask them what's the problem. And like the sister just said, when you reach out to them, they could either like it or accept it, or we could find another way together. But you can't let nobody push you out of your pocket just because they feel one way or the other.
Beautiful.
And
Sitting.
I would add, we should also draw from history, because I don't know why it's like we expect a monolithic community. Actually, the diversity within our community is a powerful thing, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's an effective thing. So to have the Black Panthers alongside MLK worked. To have the agitators alongside the decision maker, changers, opinion shaper, changers works. So it's to identify, because I think in the end, maybe there's something there that the agitators think that perhaps MPAC is a threat, or whatever X institution is a threat. And their existence threatens our survival, because the reality is we have a smaller community, and there's only so much money that goes around. And so if they donate to you, perhaps they don't donate to me. Long story short is to wipe away, and it's gonna take time, but to instill the idea that we're actually not threatening each other. We should be working on parallel tracks. You enter this way, I'm gonna go that way, but the end goal is the same. And I think
it's complementary is what you're saying.
Complementary in drawing from history, because our tradition has diversity built in. I mean, the fiqh isn't just one fiqh, right? Like we have Shafi'i, we have Hanafi, Hanbali. I mean, and those are the four, Jafari. And those are the ones that survived, and then there were so many more. And that's part of our tradition. That's part of what makes us who we are. So I guess translating that, analogizing that to politics today.
Very good. And in conclusion, we have just a couple of minutes. I wanted to hear final reflections on this theme of engagement and resistance. Maybe leave us with your reflection and something to uplift us, some positive or inspiring pearl of wisdom.
It's just simplicity is key. Keep your strategy simple. Work at it every day. Do not get scared or afraid. And know why you're here. Know why your purpose. Because somebody is always there to knock you off your purpose. But you have to know this and be about like, that's not why I'm here, that's why you here. And have your integrity in place, because people will Google you to find out what they could throw at you. So that's why you have to have your integrity in place. And just keep it simple. You know what I'm saying? And reach out to those people who oppose you. Because at LA Voice, what we do, if we got a problem with, if we know who's holding our power and it's the opposing side, we schedule a meeting with them to see what their moral universe sounds and look like and how that could come together with what we're doing. At the M Foundation, we practice intellect, love, and mercy. So we put the both together. And then we exercise it through our network, the Coalition to Preserve Human Dignity, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Beautiful. Thank you. You can go ahead and show them some love. Mustafa.
Closing, I would say that, the Muslim community, we're at a, pivotal moment in our history and, United States history, and like the decisions we make now are going to be very consequential for the United States and our, our community. So, with engagement and resistance, I think we just need to be cognizant of the fact that both are necessary for, where we're trying to go. You're going to have the Linda Sarsours and the Zahra Bilus, right? The agitators and the activists, but you also need the, Rashida Tlaibs and the Ilhan Omars who just got elected to Congress, right? You need both. And if you look back to the past, kind of like Serene mentioned, Malcolm X wouldn't have been as effective if, Martin Luther King Jr. didn't operate how he did, and vice versa, in my opinion. Because, it's almost like the good cop, bad cop routine in a way, right? So I think we just need to recognize that the intentions within our community are pure. Hopefully they are, but recognize they're pure, and everyone's trying to, progress the community, advance justice, And once you keep that in mind to, be okay that someone else is operating in a different capacity than you, right? Maybe, certain individuals are running for office and operating within electoral politics. And then other individuals, are agitating outside of those institutions that you're trying to get into. But, for where we're trying to go, you're going to need both. And historically, that's the way it's always been. And that's what I believe is the way forward for us as a community.
Can I say something real quick?
Of course.
Well, hold on, let people clap for Mustafa's last final comment. All right.
The Linda Sansores and the Rashidas, they both come from an authentic space. Right. They're coming from the same source. We was at the Solidarity Summit all together, and everybody had their different approaches. But they all agreed at the end of the day, this is what we're fighting for.
Right.
So, the Sansores and the Tylers, they're still on the same team.
Right. Yeah, I think that's just, making sure everyone has the right intention, which they do, obviously, and then operating how they both, how they do.
Beautiful. Connie.
Not much to say after those great summaries. Just remember the mission, the strategy that it takes to get to the mission. Don't get too caught up in fighting over the tactics. You need both resistance, engagement, you need infiltration, you need all of the tactics, protest, culture, media, education, all of those are engagement. And they're also resistance. False dichotomy, you need it all, but most of all, you need your alliances. We are now a minority, a country of minorities, racial minorities, ethnic minorities. There's no majority. If you count Protestants versus Catholics, there's actually not a majority religion anymore. It's a country. You have to have alliances, unlikely alliances that will transform us all toward the goals, where all of us live in safety and prosperity with equality and freedom and responsibility. And I think that MPAC is one of the bridges to that strategy, a bridge builder, a community. You're making the American tapestry expand. And so you have as much to teach, the American story, and I look forward to going on that journey with you.
Beautiful.
Make sure to just never give up for what you're pushing for. You're going to have people say things that you aren't going to necessarily like or that's going to disenfranchise you in a way. But always stick to that why. A friend of mine, I'm going to call him Mark, he told me this one story. His father was incarcerated for drunk driving. Luckily for him, he didn't kill anyone. He was sent to federal prison. Governor Jerry Brown signed this realignment bill where he basically put him in for-profit prisons and county prisons. When Mark was talking to me about this, he said that his father was sadly killed in the for-profit prison because they put him in a cell with 3 other people. And sticking to that why, sticking to I'm doing this for Marcus, I'm doing this for the disenfranchised people who can't necessarily speak up for themselves because the system has pushed them to not stand up for what they believe in. So making sure you stick to that why and push for that faith. Push for that hope because there's that light at the end of the tunnel and you just have to keep going so that people that can't stand up for themselves will eventually at the end of the day be able to. And there's a lot of hope in this country. We have a huge minority base now and it's just about getting them out. And yeah.
Beautiful. Take us home, Sidine.
All right. Look into yourself. Identify how you can play a positive role and contribute in that way. Stop exhausting energy into what everyone else is doing wrong and focus on how can I do right and create those alliances and connect those bridges and be part of the solution.